Look around, this is our strength. We rise together, now move, feel that power, let's go! Ready to go? Yeah, let's do it. Nice and deep!
Not to watch a performance, but because something was happening on the gym floor that none of them had words for yet. The trainer never scoffed again, not at anyone. The young man's name was Bruce Lee, and he hadn't thrown a single punch. Los Angeles in 1969 had a particular way of organizing its hierarchies, not loudly, not with posted rules or formal declarations, but with the quiet, practiced efficiency of a city that had spent decades deciding who belonged where and had grown comfortable with those decisions going unexamined. Status here was architectural, built into the rooms people occupied, the clubs they accessed, the spaces that opened for them without negotiation and remained closed to everyone else. The Meridian Athletic Club on the west side was that kind of space. It was not the largest facility in the city. It did not need to be. Its value was not measured in square footage, but in selectivity, in the particular density of serious, credentialed, physically accomplished people who trained there, and the unspoken understanding that this density was not accidental. Membership was referred, not advertised. The equipment was maintained with the quiet attentiveness of a place that understood its clientele would notice anything less. The floor was clean. The light was good. The staff moved with the controlled efficiency of people who had been hired not just for knowledge, but for a certain quality of presence. It was, by the standards of its time and city, exceptional, and it knew it. Raymond Holt had been the club's head trainer for 6 years by the spring of 1969. He was 34. Broad through the shoulders, economical in his movements, with the particular physical authority of a man who had spent his entire adult life inside the specific culture of serious training. He had played collegiate football at a level that warranted attention without quite warranting a professional future, and had redirected that energy into certification, study, and the slow accumulation of professional reputation that, by now, was substantial enough to be simply assumed by everyone in the room. He was good at his work. He was known to be good at his work. And in a room where competence was the baseline expectation, being known for something above the baseline mattered in ways both practical and atmospheric. Holt set the tone of the floor, not through decree, through presence. Through the particular confidence of a man who had never, in this room, encountered a situation his training had not prepared him for. The free trial program was a quarterly concession, a brief opening of the membership boundary, approved reluctantly by the club's management as a gesture toward accessibility and tolerated by the regular membership because it was limited, supervised, and temporary. Trial guests were issued a dated pass, shown the facility once, and largely left to navigate the floor with the ambient guidance of proximity to people who knew what they were doing. Most trial guests behaved predictably. They arrived uncertain, moved carefully, deferred visibly to the room's established rhythms. Some returned with membership applications. Most did not. Either outcome was acceptable. The club absorbed them briefly and returned to itself without disruption. It was a system that worked because it had never been genuinely tested. On an unremarkable Tuesday morning in that spring, a young man presented a guest pass at the front desk. The staff member processed it without particular attention. The details were ordinary: name recorded, pass validated, a brief orientation to the floor's layout. The young man thanked him quietly and moved toward the training area. He was slight. He was young. He carried a small canvas bag. The room did not look up. It had no reason to. Not yet. Bruce Lee did not announce himself when he entered the training floor. He did not look for anyone to acknowledge him. He did not pause at the entrance the way newcomers often do, scanning the room, measuring the space against themselves, calculating where they might belong. He simply walked in, read the layout in a single pass, and moved toward the far end of the floor, where the equipment was less crowded, and the light came in lower through the industrial windows. He set down a small canvas bag. He removed his jacket. He began. What he began was not recognizable, not immediately, and not in the way the gym understood training to look. There was no warm-up lap, no progressive weight selection that followed the visible logic of a man building towards something. He moved between stations with a quietness that read, to a casual observer, almost like uncertainty, as though he were browsing rather than working. A staff member near the front desk watched him for a moment, then returned to his clipboard. Nothing here required attention. The first member to look twice was a man named Gerald Cutler, a welterweight boxer, semi-professional. Well regarded in the gym's internal hierarchy for the simple reason that people who understood physical capability tended to recognize his. Cutler had been training at this club for 3 years. He knew how men moved when they were strong. He knew how they moved when they believed they were strong. He had learned to tell the difference early, because in his discipline, the difference was often the last thing you assessed before it was too late. He looked at the young man on the far side of the floor. He looked again. Not because anything was impressive, because something was quiet in a way that did not match the body producing it. Cutler would later describe it, years later, in a conversation that was never intended for publication, as watching someone perform a movement he had done 10,000 times himself, and realizing, with no drama and no pleasure, that he had been doing it wrong. He didn't say this with bitterness. He said it the way a craftsman might describe watching an older craftsman work, with a kind of recognition that arrives before understanding does. Raymond Holt, meanwhile, was standing near the squat rack speaking with one of the club's senior members. He had noted the new arrival in the peripheral way that head trainers develop, a reflex more than a decision. Young, light, free trial pass, he had filed the observation and moved on. It was a colleague, not Holt, who made the remark first. The exact words are not recorded. Those who remember it describe it as quiet, almost offhand, the kind of comment that is made sideways, not to wound, but to confirm a shared reading of the room. Something about size. Something about the mismatch between the equipment being used and the person using it. The tone was not cruel. It was the tone of a professional who believed, with reasonable confidence, that he already understood what he was looking at. The remark moved through the room the way such things do in close spaces, not loudly, but completely. Several members heard it. A few smiled. No one objected. Bruce Lee, at the far end of the floor, continued. He had not heard it. Or if he had, nothing in his body acknowledged it. He moved to the next station. He adjusted the weight. He began again. Gerald Cutler did not walk over immediately. That was the thing witnesses would remember most clearly afterward, not the interaction itself, but the deliberateness that preceded it. Cutler was not an impulsive man. He had spent years in a discipline that punished impulsiveness with immediacy and precision. He watched first. He assessed. And only when he had formed a complete enough picture did he move. He finished his set. He toweled his hands. He crossed the floor. What followed was not a confrontation in any sense the word usually carries. There were no raised voices, no posturing, no circle of onlookers gathering with the particular energy that surrounds open conflict. If anything, the exchange looked, from a distance, like two men sharing a passing observation about equipment, the kind of brief, collegial moment that happens dozens of times in a gym on any given afternoon. Cutler positioned himself one station away. He began a set. Between repetitions, he spoke. He asked, in the easy tone of a man who already knew the answer, what Bruce was training for. It was the kind of question that carries more architecture than it appears to. In a room like this one, among men who understood physical competition, the question was a kind of doorway. The answer you gave located you. It told the room what category you belonged to, what standard applied to you, and therefore how seriously your presence deserved to be taken. Bruce answered without pausing his movement. He said he trained because the body was worth understanding. Cutler absorbed this. He completed another repetition. His expression did not change. But something in the quality of his attention did, a slight recalibration, the kind that happens when an expected answer does not arrive, and the mind must quietly reorganize around the one that did. He asked a second question. Practical, this time, about the movement Bruce was performing, a variation neither Cutler nor anyone else in the room had seen structured quite that way. There was genuine curiosity in it, though Cutler would not have called it that. He would have called it professional assessment. Bruce stopped. He looked at the station. He explained it in 2 sentences, not the philosophy behind it, not the lineage of thought that had produced it. 2 sentences about mechanics, about where the load traveled and why that mattered. Cutler nodded once. He returned to his set. That was all. No challenge was issued. No hierarchy was formally disturbed. 2 men had exchanged fewer than 40 words across adjacent stations, and then both had returned to their work. But the gym had heard it. Not the words. The room was too large and too loud for that. What the gym had heard was something beneath the words. The particular frequency of an interaction in which one person asked a question expecting to find a ceiling, and instead found no ceiling at all. Rooms that are built around physical hierarchy are exquisitely sensitive to this frequency. They detect it before they understand it. Conversations near the front desk tapered. A man on the rowing machine slowed his stroke without appearing to notice he had done so. Raymond Holt, across the room, glanced toward the far end of the floor for the second time that afternoon. He did not look away as quickly as he had the first time. Bruce Lee adjusted the station. He increased the load. He continued. The room continued with him, quietly, without quite meaning to. There is a particular kind of silence that does not arrive all at once. It accumulates. It begins at the edges of a room and moves inward, station by station, the way a tide recedes, not dramatically, not with announcement, but with a quiet and total certainty that something has shifted in the underlying conditions. That is what happened in the hour that followed. Bruce Lee was not performing. That was the first and most important thing witnesses would struggle to articulate afterward. There was no awareness of audience in his movement, no adjustment for observation, no subtle expansion of effort that human beings instinctively produce when they know they are being watched. He was doing precisely what he had been doing since he arrived, moving through a private logic that had nothing to do with the room around him and everything to do with something interior, something already long decided. And yet the room could not stop watching. What they were seeing was efficiency in its truest and least theatrical form, not speed, though there was speed, not strength, though the strength was evident in ways that defied the frame of the body producing it. What they were seeing was the complete absence of waste. Every movement began exactly where it needed to begin. Every transition between positions contained nothing extra, no preparation that announced itself, no recovery that lingered beyond its function. The load he was managing and the energy he was visibly expending existed in a ratio that the room's experienced eyes could not reconcile with anything in their existing vocabulary. A man near the cable station, a former Army Ranger named Douglas Parr, who had spent 11 years studying what trained bodies could and could not do under pressure, set down his barbell at the midpoint of a set. He set it down carefully, deliberately, the way a man sets something down when he needs both hands free to think. He stood still for a moment. Then he sat on the bench behind him. He watched. He did not pick the barbell up again for 4 minutes. Later, when asked about it, Parr would say only that he had needed to recalibrate. That something in what he was observing had made his own training feel, not inadequate exactly, but approximate, as though he had been working from a map that was mostly accurate but had been missing a significant piece of terrain. Others followed, not in a crowd, not with the self-conscious choreography of people who know they are participating in a moment, but in the quiet, individual way of people who simply stop because stopping is the only honest response to what they are witnessing. The boxer Cutler, to his considerable credit, did not stop, but his rhythm changed. His combinations slowed. His eyes moved between sequences to the far end of the floor. He was recalculating something. It was visible in the quality of his stillness between movements. Raymond Holt had crossed to the east side of the floor on a routine matter, a member with a form question, a minor adjustment to a program. Routine. Professional. The ordinary texture of his afternoon. He addressed the member's question. He turned to leave. He did not leave. Something at the far end of the floor held him in place, with the particular authority of a thing that does not ask for your attention, but receives it entirely. He watched Bruce Lee complete a single movement sequence, just one. His expression did not change. but his clipboard lowered to his side, slowly, and remained there. Raymond Holt was not a small man in his field. He held certifications that were not easily earned. He had trained collegiate athletes, a handful of professionals, and one former Olympic alternate whose name still appeared occasionally in the club's promotional materials. He had spent 15 years building a professional identity around the precise and confident transmission of physical knowledge, around the authority that comes from knowing not just what works, but why it works, and being able to articulate that distinction clearly enough that others would pay for the explanation. He was, by any reasonable measure, qualified. And that was exactly what made the next few minutes so difficult for him. What Holt watched was not a technique he had never seen. That would have been easier. Novelty is manageable. You can categorize novelty, file it, decide later whether it deserves incorporation. What Holt watched was something categorically more unsettling, a movement he had taught hundreds of times, a foundational pattern he had refined and corrected and demonstrated across 15 years of professional practice, being performed in a way that made his version of it feel like a rough draft, not wrong, not opposite, a rough draft. The distinction mattered enormously to a man whose authority rested on precision. He watched Bruce complete the sequence a second time. The mechanics were the same mechanics Holt taught. The principles were recognizable, but somewhere inside the execution, in the relationship between tension and release, in the moment of transition that most practitioners treated as neutral space, there was something present that Holt had never thought to address. Had never thought to address because he had never noticed it was missing. He became aware, standing there with his clipboard at his side, that he was holding his breath. He released it quietly. He looked down at the clipboard. He looked back up. Bruce had moved to the next station. The sequence was gone. The moment was ordinary again, but Holt remained where he was. Witnesses described the change in him as subtle and total simultaneously. He did not visibly deflate. He did not redden. He made no gesture that would have read, from across the room, as anything other than a trainer pausing in the middle of his afternoon. But those close enough to observe his face described something happening behind his eyes, a quiet, private reorganization, the kind that does not produce immediate action, but from which no one fully returns to what they were before. He did not approach Bruce Lee. He did not make another remark to his colleague. He simply resumed his movement through the room, checking in with members, adjusting programs, performing the ordinary functions of his role. But the commentary had stopped. The easy professional confidence that had colored his presence all afternoon had not disappeared exactly. It had become reserved, turned inward, applied to something he was apparently still working through. The colleague who had shared the earlier remark attempted, once, to re-engage him with a glance, the kind of look that invites continuation of a shared joke. Holt did not return it, not coldly, not pointedly. He simply did not return it, in the way a man does not return to a conversation he has already privately closed. Near the end of the afternoon, one of the members, Douglas Parr, the former ranger who had set down his barbell and not immediately retrieved it, passed Holt near the water station. Parr said nothing about what had occupied the room for the past hour. Neither did Holt, but Parr would recall later that Holt had the particular expression of a man who had just been handed a question he intended to spend a long time answering. Not a defeated expression, a working one. Bruce Lee collected his jacket, placed it over his arm, and left the club that afternoon the same way he had entered it, without announcement, without acknowledgement sought or given. The canvas bag over one shoulder, the guest pass presumably returned to the front desk. The door opened. The door closed. The room exhaled without knowing it had been holding anything. He did not return to that gym. He didn't need to. What he left behind was not a story, not immediately. Stories require distance before they solidify. What he left behind in the hours and days that followed was closer to a residue, a persistent low-frequency discomfort in the minds of the men who had been present, the kind that attaches itself to moments of genuine recalibration and does not release until something has been done with it. Douglas Parr returned to training the following morning. He later said he had spent the intervening evening attempting to isolate, technically, what he had observed, that he had gone through his own movement patterns with a new and uncomfortable attention, that he had found, in that process, several things he could not explain away. He revised his training. Quietly, without drama, without attribution. The way professionals absorb influence when pride is still present but honesty is stronger. Gerald Cutler took longer, not because he was less perceptive, but because he was closer to the center of what the afternoon had disturbed. He had been the one to cross the floor. He had been the one to ask the questions. He had received, in return, 2 sentences about mechanics that had continued, unbidden, to rearrange themselves in his mind for weeks afterward. He would go on to significantly alter his approach to conditioning work over the following 18 months. His trainer at the time noted the change without understanding its origin. Cutler never explained it. There was, perhaps, nothing to explain that did not require first admitting something he was not yet ready to admit. That 40 words exchanged across adjacent stations with a 135-pound man on a free trial pass had quietly dismantled several assumptions he had carried for years. Raymond Holt's revision was the most thorough and the least visible. Within the year following that afternoon, he restructured a significant portion of his training curriculum. The changes were methodical, considered, and never publicly attributed to anything in particular. Colleagues who knew his previous approach noticed the evolution. Some assumed continuing education. Some assumed a new influence in the field. None of them knew about the afternoon. Holt did not discuss it. What he had seen in that single movement sequence, the thing that had stopped him mid-floor with his clipboard at his side, had not left him. It had instead done what genuine insight does when it finds a disciplined mind. It had been absorbed slowly, tested carefully, and integrated without ceremony into the structure of his professional life. He was, by any account, a better trainer afterward. He never said why. Years later, in separate contexts, both Parr and Cutler would reference that afternoon unprompted. Not in accounts of witnessing something extraordinary. In accounts of the last time they had been certain they understood something and been wrong. They used, without coordination, without any shared conversation on the subject, language that was nearly identical. Both described not a demonstration, not a confrontation, not a performance. Both described the experience of watching someone be completely, and without apparent effort, exactly what they were, and the particular silence that produces in a room full of people still in the process of becoming.